This documentary is all about Thomas Paine and what he believes it means to be an American. Thomas Paine was an incredibly influential person, as he basically laid the foundation for the entire country through the Declaration of Independence, which he completely inspired, and for the notion of independence at all. Before that, all of the colonists just wanted reconciliation, and Thomas Paine just blew their minds and opened the idea of independence. So he is basically the founder of America. Now join me as we go back in time and look at how Thomas Paine created this country and what it meant to him to be an American.
Thomas Paine was born in Thetford, England in 1737, but as a child he had very little education, just enough to be able to read and write. At the age of 13, he was already working with his father as a corset maker. After trying to get several jobs and failing, he eventually found an occupation as an officer of excise.
He used some of his profit to buy books. Paine continued on having 2 unsuccessful marriages, several unsuccessful jobs, and even being fired from his job as an excise officer. Although Paine's life seemed to be spiraling out of control, this all changed one day in London when he met Benjamin Franklin, who advised him to go to America.
By November 1774, Paine was in the colonies right as the fighting was ramping up. During this time, America was planning to go to war with Britain. Britain had taxed the colonists without giving them representation in Parliament. This angered the colonists, and they were willing to fight a war so this unjust taxation would stop. On one fateful winter night, the colonists were throwing snowballs at the British troops when suddenly one of them snapped and shots were fired. When the dust settled, there were 5 dead colonists in the square. This event, named the Boston Massacre, became grossly exaggerated, but stirred many colonists into anger against Britain. Things just went downhill from here. Although many efforts were made from both sides, eventually, at the Battle of Concord, a shot was fired, which officially started the American Revolution. Frantic, the colonists convened in the Second Continental Congress, where they started fundraising for an army and a navy. After these battles, Paine started writing Common Sense, and he published his 48-page pamphlet encouraging independence on July 10, 1776. This document was flying off the presses with over 120,000 copies in just the first month. In today's numbers, that is about 12 million copies sold. This document went on to persuade the colonists to start fighting for independence and not reconciliation with Britain. This caused the colonists not only to fight better, but it bolstered recruitment. The document changed the entirety of U.S. history, and many people even argue that it laid the foundation for not only the Declaration of Independence, but the entire United States. This leads to the question, what does it mean to be an American for Thomas Paine? This is very important as he basically set up the country through common sense. He explains that being an American means being selfless and brave. More than that, he believed being an American meant receiving fairness, safety, and freedom from one's government.
Being fair was one of Paine's most core beliefs. It is clearly reflected through everything he wrote and argued for. This is especially true for his belief that the British government was corrupt and even flawed. He explains in Part 2 of Common Sense that, for all men being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. And though himself might deserve some decent degree of honors among his contemporaries, yet his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them. Paine clearly is describing how unfair hereditary succession is in the British government. He explains that even if someone deserves to be king, it doesn't suddenly make all of his children guaranteed to be as good as he was. This completely contradicts the belief that men are originally all equals, and therefore, Paine argues, it is unfair, unjust, and should not be tolerated. Paine explains it through his very straightforward logic. This simple logic allows the common man to understand exactly why this type of government is unfair, and why it is obviously corrupt. He also uses exaggeration to appeal to feelings of the readers through pathos. He uses phrases like might deserve and far too unworthy to subtly sway the reader to see how unfair this government is. This unfairness really drives Paine. He can't stand having a corrupt government in charge, and this is shown through his writing as time and time again he urges the colonists to abandon the British government and make their own more fair democracy. Included in Paine's cry for fairness was his plea for freedom from the corruption of a monarchy and the power to the people. Paine firmly believed that to be an American meant that you would be free from the controlling and unfair governments, and that you would hold power. Furthermore, he argued that, as said in the Declaration of Independence, a document inspired by his writing, that to secure these rights, Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Paine believes strongly that the power belonged to the people, and that being an American gave you that right. Paine explains this further in Part 2 of Common Sense. But where it says some is the King of America, I tell you, friend, he reigns from above, and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brood of Britain. Yet that we may not appear to be defective even in earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter. Let it be brought forth and placed under divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. But lest any ill use should afterwards arise, let the crown be at the conclusion of the ceremony be demolished and scattered among the people whose right it is. Paine understood that in America the law is the only king, so that Americans will have freedom from the corrupt human kings. He explained that even if this law somehow became outdated or corrupt, that the power belongs in the hands of the people and not a king. This argument appealed to the logic of the people, as again it is extremely straightforward. Paine even said that in language as plain as ABC, he holds the truth up to your eyes. Throughout the entirety of Common Sense, he explains that he just wants the people to be in control of their government and to be free of all the terrible things that a monarch brings to the country. About 11 months after Thomas Paine published Common Sense, he wrote another pamphlet and published it on December 19, 1776, called The American Crisis No. 1. This was intended to boost morale and further convince the Loyalists that independence is a right choice for the colonists. Thomas Paine believes that Americans needed to be selfless and brave and fight for America for the future generations. He explains that he once heard a man say, "Well, give me peace in my day." But he illustrates that not a man lives on the continent, but fully believes that separation must sometime or other finally take place, and that a generous parent should have said, "If there be trouble, let it be in my day, that my child may have peace." And this single reflection, well applied, is sufficient to awaken every man to duty. Paine describes that being an American means to be selfless, and in this time, fighting for the future generations, so that they might have happier lives. Paine uses his emotions here to demonstrate how he believes every American should fight what matters most to them, their children's lives, and the happiness that comes with them. Overall, Paine believed that being an American meant being selfless and fighting for the future generations, while also receiving fairness, safety, and freedom from one's government.